Alrighty, so today we're going to do the season preview of the Chicago Fire, and I feel like today is a perfect day for me to do the season preview of the Chicago Fire. Consider they just broke their transfer record today of announcing the signing of Hugo Kuipers, and that this is definitely going to go down as one of the biggest signing in terms of the amount that is spent by an MLS team this offseason after spending $10 million plus $3 million of add-on if the performance incentive is reach. But besides that, obviously for the Chicago Fire, I don't want to use the word hope about them coming into this season because as soon as I said that, all Fire fans will basically point out the narrative and just simply a curse that is going on with this team for now over a decade of this team being not just a mediocre team, but just a mediocre bad team and suffer some of the most painful heartbreaks and just circling the wheel up of despair for over a decade now. But what I will say is that when you look at the roster that they constructed and the signings that they have made, there could be a chance where this could be finally the year where the Fire not only end the longest active not appearing in the playoffs streak out of any MLS team, but they could maybe finally win a playoff game, which, as I'll mention, it's been a long time since they have won a playoff game. So how long has it been? Besides them finish 10, 10, and 14 and finish with 40 points and having a very Chicago Fire-esque kind of season with them doing well at points of the season, especially in the middle part of the season, and then just suffer their usual collapse in the latter part of the season. But they miss out on the playoffs and finish right around the spot where they have been pretty much been finishing for the past decade or so. But yeah, they have the longest non playoff appearance list out of any team in terms of the active streak. They have not made playoffs since 2017. It's 6 years now that they have not made it to playoffs. But as I mentioned, the last time they made it to the playoffs and actually won a playoff game was all the way back to 2009. And I believe that is the longest streak out of any team to not won a playoff game right now in MLS. And that, of course, does not include teams that obviously have never won a playoff game. That is, because there are a couple of teams that have never won a playoff game. But in terms of MLS Cup, we all know that this is the team that, as bad as the Chicago Fire has been for the past decade, at least they still have this. They can hang their head on of being the only expansion team to ever win MLS Cup in their expansion season. And although we have teased that a couple of teams in the past that has been able to do so, especially St. Louis was one team that we thought maybe could do so after finishing at the top of the Western Conference. Didn't happen. They got ousted in the first round, and that they'll still have the honor of being the only MLS team to ever win MLS Cup in their expansion season. And I also think that that's going to be a record that's going to stand for a very very long time. Because obviously, as we get closer and closer to 30 teams, we know that the expansion is going to slow down a lot, and there's not going to be a threat that maybe this expansion team can be joining the Fire as be the only MLS team to win an MLS Cup in their expansion season. That being said, in terms of the transfers, so what's kind of interesting about the signings is that early on it was relatively quiet. Early on, you could see a lot of Fire fans were a little concerned and feel like the management were tone deaf once again in terms of what they really need to fix in terms of their roster and not doing their job to do so. But as the offseason goes along, finally the signing of course has happened. And obviously, as I mentioned, the biggest signing that they have this offseason and arguably one of the biggest signings that they ever made in their club history. Probably right up there when they decided to bring Xherdan Shaqiri and even bring the likes of Bastian Schweinsteiger to the Chicago Fire. And that, of course, is Hugo Kuipers. The fact that they decided to get him for $10 million plus $3 million and in performance incentive if it's reach. Easily the biggest transfer that the Chicago Fire has ever has, and they have finally had that mentality that hey, we're now gonna join the big boys. We're gonna splash out the cash to finally found that number nine that we've been looking for a very long time, and we'll see whether, of course, that is the case. I mean, as I said before, and I said this with teams when they spend big amount for a number nine, and even a big amount for a player in general, there are definitely going to be pressure that those players got to live up to his expectation, and that kind of goes the case with Hugo Kuipers. He's got to at least score 10 or 15 plus goal, or even in contention of winning the Golden Boot, because you do not spend that much money and expect a player to be a huge disappointment. And this is where that's where we have to talk about the narrative of the Chicago Fire team, where it just feels like no matter what kind of signing they do and what kind of marquee signing that they have, if you made him a player, a designated player, then yeah, they're not going to perform because they have a terrible track record in terms of their designated player list, really for the past decades or so, and we'll see whether or not if Hugo Kuipers can defeat that narrative, and will he actually be a guy that could maybe even be one of the top goal scorers in the league as the season goes along, because I do think that with them getting a number 9 right now, that was kind of one of the missing pieces that they needed. I mean, they do have a decent attack, and especially a decent number 10 group with Shaqiri and Brian Gutierrez being there, and that of course if Shaqiri can actually showed up in games besides what we saw last season against Inter Miami, but Brian Gutierrez was very promising last season too. So with him and giving the service to Kuipers, I won't be surprised that this Fire team that has really been very lackluster in terms of the attack, that maybe finally things are gonna turn the table. And besides that, they also got a new center back in Tobias Sokris, and then they of course made a very questionable signing of getting Tom Barlow, which I think now this signing thing isn't as questionable, considering they got a big time DP number 9 there. I think Tom Barlow could be a good backup option. Yes, I know the butts of jokes about Tom Barlow being a bad finisher, and that I've always mentioned the fact that your team is bad when you concede to Tom Barlow, but he's still a serviceable player, at least in a backup role. In terms of the draft, they got Lawrence Wooten, Brian Dahl, and Jason Shekaluk as the free draft players from the Super Draft this season. They also got Chase Gasper from the Houston Dynamo, and while Chase Gasper looks nothing like the Chase Gasper that I mentioned before during his time with Minnesota and how his career has really kind of took a nosedive, he's still a good backup option for this team. They also got Alan Agroni from FC Lugano, because of course it feels like it's a given for the Chicago Fire that they have to sign at least one player from FC Lugano, consider the ownership group of this team basically also own FC Lugano, and they have that partnership. And also another player I didn't add on this list, and I forgot to add on this list, is Andrew Goodman returning to his hometown in Chicago, and we'll see how that, of course, will turn out for the Chicago Fire team. Now, in terms of players that they lost, they didn't really lose too many key pieces. I mean, probably the biggest pieces they lost this offseason is Miguel Navarro, but they also lost Alex Muniz, Kendall Burks, Kai Kamara. Actually, I think that this would be the biggest piece that they lost. I'm kind of surprised they decided not to give Kai Kamara another go around, because I think Kai Kamara last season was really good, and you can still see that he's kind of like an ageless wonder on the attack, especially in the air. He was so lethal in the air, and that I wonder if there's going to be another MLS team that's going to give him a chance. I mean, surely there has to be another MLS team that's going to give him a chance, because he's the ultimate journeyman in terms of MLS. But they also lost Aaron Rodriguez, Alonso Estes, and Usman Doumbia this offseason. The Usman Doumbia one, they're very thankful that they finally cut ties of that contract, because he's one of the DP player, and I mentioned he's one of the two DP player on this Fire team that turns out to be a bust, all caps. So one name that I didn't mention in terms of player that is no longer on this team, that I'm pretty sure all Fire fans are hoping to see, is Jairo Torres. So unfortunately for Fire fans, Jairo Torres is still on this team, and like I said, you talk about probably the worst DP contract right now in MLS. It's got to be Jairo Torres, and the fact that they can't get out of it. I mean, they're trying their best to get out of the contract. There's been numerous report of him potentially going back to Mexico, and I think it's getting to a point where I don't think the Chicago Fire care how much they of course will receive from teams in Mexico, but as long as they can finally got rid of that contract and open a DP spot, it will really help this roster, and can even improve this roster even better heading into this upcoming season, because that is still one of the biggest dead weight that this team needs to get rid of. heading into this season. Now, when you look at their preseason schedule, they won 5-1 against Louisville City before drawing 2-2 against the New York Red Bulls. They're going to be playing a couple of games in the Coachella Valley Invitational, starting with them playing against Austin FC, then they play LAFC, and then they play against Minnesota United, which, by the way, I'm actually going to be at that game. That is going to be a game that I'm going to be watching alongside with the Quakes versus the Portland Timbers and also the other games that is going on around that time. But then on February 17th, they close out the preseason against the Portland Timbers. Now, looking at the first 10 games to start the season, well, it's definitely not an easy start for the Chicago Fire. In fact, they're going to run through a gauntlet straight away with them playing on the road against the Philadelphia Union. Then they have to play against the two Ohio teams, starting at home against Cincinnati, and then the defending MLS Cup champion, that is the Columbus Crew. Now, it does get easier where they do play against Montreal, but then they have to go on the road to play against New England, and then going on the road again to play against Atlanta United. So they're going to be playing on the road a lot, at least in the early part of the season. Before they play against the Houston Dynamo at home, the New York Red Bulls on the road, then they play RSL and Atlanta United, who wraps up the first 10 games of their season. Now, looking at the post Leeds Cup break, it also doesn't get easier for them either. They have to go on the road to play against NYCFC before playing Messi and friends against Inter Miami at home, which I'm assuming that's going to be another sold out crowd at Soldier Field. And I'm pretty sure that crowd at Soldier Field are really hoping that they can see Messi this time. I mean, last season, obviously, I would say as much as that sold out crowd was excited to see their hometown Fire able to get a big win, I'm pretty sure majority of people are still kind of left a little disappointed that they didn't see the greatest player of all time that they were paid to see. With that being said, they are going to be playing against DC United before playing against the New York Red Bulls on September 14th. Then they go on the road to play against Nashville before going on the road to play against Montreal. Then they play at home against Toronto, going on the road to play against Charlotte, and then they're going to be returning home to play against Nashville SC. And really, when you look at that schedule that they have, that's a relatively easy schedule to finish the season. So I think there's probably no excuse this times that this team should follow the usual narrative where they always tends to start off slow and get things going as the season goes along. And I have a feeling that narrative could probably come true again because of how tough their schedule is. But one thing that their narrative should not be coming true is the fact that they should collapse once again in September. Consider, like I said, when you look at all those teams that they're going to be playing, those are going to be teams that is going to be fighting them along with them in terms of playoffs as I think it is. A lot of those teams that I mentioned are probably going to be teams that's right on the line of making the playoffs or just missing out on the playoffs. So this is a huge opportunity for the Fire to finally end that narrative if they can go through that stretch and have a relatively good stretch and not just completely collapse like what we saw once again last season in the latter part of the season. Now, when you look at the strength of this team, it's going to be the goalkeeping and the attack. And I cannot believe I'm saying the attack is one of the strengths for the Fire because this was actually the weakness of this team. But again, if Hugo Kuipers live up to the expectation that he is, being a 10 or 15 plus goal scorer, and not to mention, on the attacking end, if Brian Gutierrez is going to have another good season, and if Shaqiri can at least show up maybe half of those games. Not to mention even on the wing area, they have some good option with Haile Selassie and Chris Mueller being there. This is actually a very underrated attack. I think this attack could really surprise a lot of people that they can actually produce the goals that was clearly missing last season. And then of course goalkeeping is a strength for this team because they must be very blessed. The fact that they decided to sell Gabriel Solina for a huge amount of money to Chelsea, and his replacement is just as good as it is. It's almost similar to the New England situation where as soon as they lost Matt Turner to a Premier League team, they replaced him with Georgi Petrovic, and little do we know that he turns out to be just as good as Matt Turner. And I feel like this is kind of the same case with Chris Brady is picking up where Gaga Salina left with this team, and that there won't be a big surprise that he might be sold off for a big amount of money if he can continue the great goalkeeping that he has, because last season he was really one of the big bright side in terms of the defensive part of this team, because obviously I think the biggest weakness for this team is still going to be on the defensive end. Yes, they did add some pieces on the defensive end, but some of these pieces are very questionable We don't know if Tobias Sekeres is going to be a good defender, and the same goes with Alan Ogoni that they got from FC Lugano. And then of course the midfield is always a question for this team. I still think that they still need a number 8 on this team, and that's going to be something that maybe they'll address as the off season goes along. But the defense maybe could be a thing that could let them down, and Chris Brady is going to have to do a couple of bailout job like he did last season. So the expectation for this team, it's got to be make the playoffs. I mean, it's obvious that this team needs to finally end this streak and end this curse once and for all of them having this narrative of just collapsing in the latter part of the season. And as I said earlier, they have a really easy schedule to finish the season, and they have a schedule where they're going to be playing against teams that's going to be fighting for those playoff positions. So I do think that this is kind of the time where they need to finally end that narrative. And I've even said it many times. This Fire fan base deserve this and deserve to finally see their team make it to the playoffs. It's been just a brutal decade for this team, and really a brutal last 6 years of them looking like they're on contention of being a playoff team, and then things just fell apart year after year, and we'll just see whether or not if that is going to be the case this season, because as I said, this team is already cursed before, but if they can't get this team that I think could be a considered to be a playoff team to get into it, then yeah, I do think that this team is truly cursed, and that again, I just feel so bad for Fire fans that have to endure this nightmare over and over again. But there you have it. That is pretty much it. Looking at the Chicago Fire in this season preview. As always, let me know in the comments below what do you think of this video, and if you're a Fire fan, what do you think is the strength, the weakness, and expectation for this team coming into this season? But until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.